Be obsessed with self-discipline, the secret key to wealth, power, and success. Most people will spend their entire lives believing they were born without the qualities necessary to achieve greatness. They will blame lack of opportunity, bad luck, difficult circumstances, their past, their fears, their anxiety, or the world around them. But the truth is much darker than that. Most people are not destroyed by failure. They are destroyed by comfort. Slowly, silently, almost invisibly. Day after day, they become weaker without even realizing it. Their minds lose sharpness. Their discipline disappears. Their focus collapses. Their ambition fades. And eventually, they accept a life far below the one they were capable of living. The modern world has mastered the art of keeping people mentally weak. Everywhere you look, there is something fighting for your attention, your energy, your focus, your self-control. Endless entertainment, endless distraction, endless noise. People wake up and immediately surrender their minds to chaos. They scroll before they think. They consume before they create. They react before they reflect. And then they wonder why they feel empty, anxious, exhausted, and emotionally lost. What most people call relaxation is often just escape. Escape from responsibility. Escape from growth. Escape from the uncomfortable truth that becoming powerful requires sacrifice. It requires discipline. It requires the ability to act when every part of your body wants to remain comfortable. And this is where the separation begins. Because while most people are searching for motivation, disciplined individuals are building empires in silence. While weak minds wait for the perfect mood, strong minds execute regardless of emotion. That is why some people change their lives completely while others stay trapped in the same cycles for years. One person obeys feelings, the other obeys purpose. Epictetus once taught in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 1, Chapter 2, that no man is free if he is not master of himself. Think about that carefully. Most people believe freedom means doing whatever they want whenever they want. But the Stoics understood something deeper. A person controlled by impulses, laziness, distraction, anger, fear, or pleasure is not free at all. They are controlled from within. Their emotions become chains. Their lack of discipline becomes a prison they carry everywhere. And the world rewards this weakness because distracted people are easier to manipulate. A person who cannot control attention cannot control life. A person addicted to comfort becomes dependent on external stimulation to feel alive. That is why so many people constantly feel restless. They cannot sit in silence. They cannot focus deeply. They cannot endure discomfort without immediately searching for escape. Their minds have been conditioned to seek pleasure every few seconds, and without realizing it, they have lost the ability to build anything meaningful. Real discipline is terrifying because it forces you to confront yourself. No excuses, no blaming others, no emotional escape routes. It reveals the brutal reality that many of the limitations in your life are being created by your own habits, your own patterns, your own unwillingness to suffer temporarily for something greater later. Seneca warned in Letters from a Stoic, Letter 18, that a man who is a slave to luxury is never prepared for hardship, and hardship eventually arrives for everyone. Life does not ask permission before testing you. Pain comes, loss comes, pressure comes, rejection comes. And when those moments arrive, weak discipline collapses immediately. This is why comfort is dangerous. It creates fragile people living under the illusion of strength. But disciplined people are different. They train themselves before life forces them to. They learn how to control emotions before chaos appears. They build mental endurance while others seek temporary pleasure. They understand that suffering avoided today often becomes suffering multiplied tomorrow. There is also something else most people never realize. Discipline is deeply connected to self-respect. Every time you break a promise to yourself, your mind remembers it. Every time you say you will change tomorrow and fail again, your confidence weakens. Eventually, people stop trusting themselves completely. They become spectators of their own lives, watching opportunities pass while telling themselves they will start someday. But someday is the favorite word of weak minds. Strong minds understand that transformation begins in ordinary moments. In the moment you wake up and choose action over excuses. In the moment you stay focused while distractions call for your attention. In the moment you continue forward despite emotional resistance. Those invisible moments shape identity, and identity shapes destiny. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 8, Paragraph 7, that the impediment to action advances action, and what stands in the way becomes the way. That is the mindset that built powerful men throughout history. They stopped viewing discomfort as an enemy. They began viewing it as training, because discipline is not punishment. Discipline is power. It is the ability to command yourself instead of being controlled by impulse. It is the ability to remain calm when others panic, focused when others quit, consistent when others become emotional. And once a person develops that level of control, everything begins to change. The way they think changes. The way they speak changes. The way they walk through life changes. The terrifying truth is that most people will never reach that level, not because they are incapable, but because they refuse to abandon the comfort that is quietly destroying them. And the deeper you understand this, the more one question begins to haunt your mind. Who could you become if you finally stopped obeying your weaknesses? The dangerous comfort that is quietly destroying your potential. There is a silent enemy destroying millions of lives right now, and most people do not even realize they are being consumed by it. It is not failure. It is not poverty. It is not bad luck. It is comfort. Dangerous comfort. The kind that slowly weakens ambition while making a person feel temporarily safe. The kind that convinces you to delay your growth, avoid discomfort, escape responsibility, and remain trapped in cycles that slowly destroy your potential from the inside out. The modern world has made comfort easier to access than ever before. Endless entertainment, instant pleasure, constant distraction, artificial validation, and unlimited ways to escape reality. A person can spend years feeling busy while accomplishing nothing meaningful, and that is exactly what makes this so dangerous. Weakness no longer feels painful in the beginning. It feels comfortable. It feels normal. It feels harmless, until one day a person wakes up and realizes they have become mentally exhausted, emotionally dependent, physically undisciplined, and completely disconnected from the person they once hoped to become. Most people are not suffering because life is unfair. They are suffering because they have trained themselves to avoid difficulty at all costs. The moment something becomes uncomfortable, they quit. The moment pressure appears, they retreat. The moment discipline is required, they search for distraction. And over time, this creates a mind that becomes incapable of handling struggle, pressure, uncertainty, or delayed gratification. Musonius Rufus taught in Lectures of Musonius Rufus, Lecture 6, that hardship is not an obstacle to human excellence, but the very condition that creates it. Ancient Stoic thinkers understood something modern society tries to hide. Comfort weakens character when it becomes addiction. A life built entirely around convenience creates fragile people who collapse under pressure because they never trained themselves to endure difficulty voluntarily. Look carefully at what is happening around you. People cannot sit in silence anymore. They cannot focus deeply without reaching for their phones. They cannot tolerate boredom, discomfort, criticism, or emotional pressure without immediately searching for escape. Their attention spans are collapsing. Their patience is disappearing. Their minds are becoming overstimulated and emotionally fragile. And the terrifying part is that this condition feels normal to them. The world has trained people to confuse pleasure with happiness. But pleasure without discipline creates emptiness. A person can consume entertainment all day and still feel miserable at night. They can avoid discomfort for years and still feel anxious every morning. Because deep inside, the human mind understands when it is wasting its own potential. That silent frustration many people carry is not random. It comes from knowing they are capable of more while continuously betraying themselves through comfort and procrastination. Seneca warned in Letters from a Stoic, Letter 78, that soft living destroys both body and mind. Those words are more relevant today than ever before. Modern comfort has created modern weakness. People have become addicted to ease while losing the psychological strength required to build meaningful lives. And this weakness does not appear only in physical habits, it appears in emotional behavior. People avoid difficult conversations. They avoid responsibility. They avoid discipline. They avoid confronting their fears. They avoid being alone with their thoughts because silence forces them to face the reality they have been escaping. Comfort is seductive because it whispers lies slowly. It tells you there is always tomorrow. It tells you to rest a little longer. It tells you to wait until you feel motivated. It tells you that small distractions do not matter. But those small distractions slowly become years of wasted potential. This is why disciplined individuals often seem rare and powerful. They are willing to do what most people refuse to do. They embrace discomfort voluntarily. They understand that growth is painful. They understand that focus requires sacrifice. They understand that the ability to resist pleasure creates enormous advantage in a world addicted to distraction. Epictetus taught in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 2, Chapter 18, that difficult circumstances reveal what men truly are. Comfort hides weakness. Pressure exposes it. The moment life becomes difficult, the person without discipline loses emotional control immediately. Panic appears. Excuses appear. Victim mentality appears. But disciplined individuals remain composed because they trained themselves before chaos arrived. Most people wait for pain before changing. That is why transformation arrives too late for so many of them. They wait until their health collapses, until opportunities disappear, until relationships fail, until regret becomes unbearable. Only then do they realize that comfort was never protecting them. It was slowly destroying them. The strongest people in history were not obsessed with comfort. They were obsessed with mastery. Mastery of emotion, mastery of impulse, mastery of thought, mastery of action. They understood that discipline is the foundation of freedom. Without discipline, a person becomes a slave to moods, habits, distractions, and temporary desires. And the truth is brutal. Every time you choose comfort over growth, you reinforce weakness inside your own mind. Every time you avoid effort, your tolerance for discomfort decreases. Every time you procrastinate, you train yourself to trust emotions more than purpose. Over time, this creates an invisible prison that becomes harder and harder to escape. But there is something most people still fail to understand. The dangerous part about comfort is not what it gives you. It is what it quietly takes away from you while you are distracted enough not to notice. Why most people lose the battle against themselves. The greatest war in your life will never be against society, your enemies, your circumstances, or the people who doubt you. The greatest war will happen inside your own mind, quietly, daily, in moments nobody else can see. It is the battle between the person you are today and the person you know you could become. And most people lose that battle long before life ever defeats them. They lose it in the morning when they choose comfort over discipline. They lose it when emotions become stronger than purpose. They lose it when temporary pleasure becomes more important than long-term growth. Over time, these small defeats accumulate until weakness becomes identity. And once weakness becomes identity, people stop fighting entirely. They begin accepting mediocrity as if it were destiny. This is the tragedy of modern life. Many people are physically alive but psychologically surrendered. Deep inside, they know they are capable of more. They know they are wasting time. They know they are becoming mentally weaker. But instead of confronting themselves honestly, they search for distraction to silence that inner voice. That is why so many people remain trapped in cycles they claim they want to escape. Their actions and desires are in conflict. One part of them wants success, discipline, strength, focus, and purpose. Another part wants comfort, ease, entertainment, and emotional escape. And every day these two identities fight for control. The problem is that most people feed the weaker version of themselves constantly. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 11, paragraph 18, that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. Think about how dangerous that truly is. A person who repeatedly entertains weakness eventually becomes weak. A person who constantly obeys distraction eventually loses the ability to focus. Human beings slowly become what they repeatedly tolerate within themselves, and modern society makes this battle even harder because weakness is constantly rewarded. People are encouraged to follow every emotion, avoid discomfort, seek validation, and escape responsibility whenever life becomes difficult. But emotional dependence destroys inner authority. A person who cannot control feelings cannot control actions, and a person who cannot control actions cannot control destiny. This internal war is exhausting because the mind always searches for the easiest path. It wants immediate pleasure. It wants comfort now and consequences later. That is why discipline feels unnatural in the beginning. You are fighting against years of conditioning, years of habits, years of emotional patterns that taught you to avoid pain at all costs. The human brain is designed to conserve energy. It prefers familiar suffering over unfamiliar growth. That is why people stay in toxic environments, destructive habits, unhealthy routines, and mediocre lives for years. Not because they enjoy suffering, but because the mind fears uncertainty more than stagnation. Epictetus taught in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 1, Chapter 29, that no great thing is created suddenly. Yet modern minds have become addicted to immediate results. People want transformation without discomfort. They want confidence without discipline. They want success without sacrifice. And when results do not arrive quickly, they quit before the process even begins to shape them. That is why self-sabotage has become so common. People destroy their own progress because their identity cannot yet handle the discomfort required for growth. A person says they want change, but subconsciously they still feel attached to the habits keeping them weak. And until identity changes, behavior rarely lasts. This is why many people restart their lives over and over again. New routines, new promises, new goals, new motivation. But eventually, they return to old patterns because they never conquered the deeper problem. Their mind remained undisciplined. Real discipline is not built by intensity. It is built by emotional control, the ability to act regardless of mood, the ability to continue despite resistance, the ability to obey principles instead of impulses. Most people underestimate how powerful this becomes over time. A disciplined person gains an enormous advantage in life because consistency compounds silently. While emotional people waste energy starting and stopping constantly, disciplined individuals keep moving forward every day, even when progress feels invisible. Seneca warned in Letters from a Stoic, Letter 16, that if a person does not know which port they are sailing toward, no wind is favorable. That is exactly what happens to undisciplined minds. They move emotionally instead of intentionally. Their decisions depend on mood. Their focus changes daily. Their standards collapse under pressure. As a result, life becomes chaotic, because the mind itself is chaotic. And chaos inside the mind eventually creates chaos in reality. The frightening truth is that most people are not being destroyed by external obstacles. They are being destroyed by internal weakness, by lack of self-control, by emotional impulsiveness, by the inability to delay gratification, by the habit of negotiating with themselves every time effort becomes uncomfortable. Every time you say you will change tomorrow, your mind remembers it. Every time you abandon discipline when emotions shift, your self-respect decreases. Eventually, people stop believing in themselves because they have repeatedly proven to themselves that their feelings are stronger than their commitments. This is why the battle against yourself is so important. Because once a person loses authority over their own mind, everything else begins to collapse afterward. Focus disappears. Confidence disappears. Purpose disappears. Strength disappears. But there is still one thing more dangerous than weakness itself. It is the invisible addiction that keeps convincing people they can escape discomfort without paying a price for it later. The silent addiction to instant gratification. There is a form of addiction destroying millions of lives that does not look dangerous at first. It does not always destroy the body immediately. It does not always leave visible scars. Most people even participate in it every single day without questioning it. But slowly, over time, it weakens attention, destroys discipline, reduces emotional control, and turns human beings into prisoners of impulse. That addiction is instant gratification. The modern world has trained people to expect rewards without waiting, entertainment without effort, pleasure without discipline, stimulation without silence. Every second, the brain is being conditioned to crave something new. Another video, another notification, another distraction, another escape from boredom. And while this may seem harmless in small moments, the long-term consequences are devastating. A mind addicted to instant gratification loses the ability to tolerate discomfort. The moment something becomes difficult, the brain demands stimulation instead. That is why so many people struggle to focus deeply, build consistency, or remain disciplined long enough to create meaningful success. Their minds have been rewired to prioritize immediate pleasure over long-term reward. And the frightening part is that this conditioning happens slowly enough that most people never notice the damage until years have already disappeared. Look around carefully. People cannot eat without watching something. They cannot walk without checking their phones. They cannot sit quietly with their own thoughts. Silence has become uncomfortable because overstimulation has become normal. The brain has lost its ability to remain present without craving constant distraction. Seneca wrote on the shortness of life, that people are protective of their personal property, but careless with their time, even though time is the one thing they can never recover. That warning feels almost prophetic today. People spend hours every day feeding distractions that give them nothing lasting in return, while convincing themselves they will become disciplined later. But later rarely comes for people addicted to stimulation. Instant gratification creates a dangerous illusion of satisfaction. For a few moments, the brain feels rewarded. Dopamine rises, attention shifts, emotions temporarily improve. But afterward, emptiness returns stronger than before. That is why people continue repeating the cycle. They are not chasing happiness anymore. They are chasing temporary relief from discomfort. This is what makes modern distraction so psychologically destructive. It trains people to avoid emotional resistance instead of overcoming it. The moment boredom appears, they escape. The moment anxiety appears, they distract themselves. The moment effort becomes difficult, they search for stimulation. Over time, this creates a person who becomes emotionally dependent on pleasure to function normally. And a person who cannot function without stimulation becomes weak in silence. Epictetus taught in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 4, Chapter 1, that no person is free who is not master of themselves. Most people believe slavery only exists externally, but the Stoics understood that internal slavery is often far more dangerous. A person controlled by impulses is not free. A person unable to resist distraction is not free. A person who constantly obeys cravings instead of principles becomes a servant to every desire that enters the mind. This addiction also destroys ambition in ways most people never recognize. Great achievements require sustained focus, patience, delayed gratification, and emotional endurance. But a mind trained by instant pleasure begins rejecting anything that does not provide immediate emotional reward. Reading becomes difficult. Deep work becomes exhausting. Discipline feels unbearable. Long-term goals lose emotional appeal because the brain now prioritizes short-term stimulation above everything else. That is why many people live with endless plans, but little execution. They consume motivation constantly but avoid consistent effort. They fantasize about success while remaining addicted to comfort and distraction. And eventually, they begin feeling frustrated without understanding that their own habits are sabotaging their ability to grow. Modern technology has amplified this problem to a level humanity has never experienced before. Entire industries profit from capturing human attention. Every notification, every endless scroll, every algorithm is designed to keep the brain emotionally stimulated for as long as possible. Attention has become one of the most valuable resources in the world because whoever controls attention eventually influences behavior. And weak minds surrender attention too easily. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 6, Paragraph 30, that the mind becomes what it focuses on repeatedly. Think about the danger hidden in that truth. A person who spends years feeding their mind distraction, comparison, emotional chaos, and meaningless stimulation cannot expect clarity, discipline, and inner peace to emerge naturally afterward. The human mind adapts to repetition. Whatever you repeatedly consume shapes your emotional state, your focus, your tolerance for discomfort, and eventually, your identity itself. This is why disciplined people guard their attention so aggressively. They understand that focus is power. They understand that every distraction weakens mental sharpness little by little. They understand that the ability to remain concentrated in a distracted world creates enormous advantage. Most people never develop this awareness. They continue surrendering their minds to impulses daily, then wonder why they feel anxious, mentally exhausted, emotionally unstable, and incapable of consistency. But the answer is simple. A distracted mind cannot build a powerful life. And there is another painful truth most people avoid confronting. Instant gratification does not only steal time. It steals the future version of yourself that could have existed if your mind had learned how to endure discomfort long enough to grow. Discipline begins when excuses end. There comes a moment in every person's life when the truth becomes impossible to avoid anymore. A moment when excuses stop sounding convincing. A moment when blaming circumstances, bad luck, lack of motivation, or difficult emotions no longer hides the reality of what is happening. That moment is where discipline begins. Most people believe transformation starts with inspiration. It does not. Real transformation begins when a person becomes tired of lying to themselves, tired of promising change while repeating the same destructive patterns, tired of watching time disappear while remaining trapped in cycles of procrastination, distraction, emotional weakness, and inconsistency. Excuses are dangerous because they feel comforting in the moment. They protect the ego temporarily. They reduce guilt. They create emotional relief. But over time, they slowly destroy self-respect. Every excuse teaches the mind that feelings are more important than responsibility. And once a person begins obeying emotions instead of principles, discipline collapses completely. The human mind is incredibly skilled at justifying weakness. People say they will start tomorrow. They say they are waiting for the right moment. They say life is too stressful right now. They say they need motivation first. But deep inside, many already know the truth. The problem is not lack of time. The problem is not lack of opportunity. The problem is the refusal to act despite discomfort. That is why disciplined individuals often appear different from everyone else. They stopped negotiating with excuses. They stopped asking their emotions for permission before taking action. They learned how to execute even when motivation disappeared. Epictetus taught in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 3, Chapter 24, that circumstances do not make the man, they only reveal him to himself. Pressure reveals character. Difficulty exposes habits. Adversity uncovers whether a person has discipline or only temporary motivation. Anyone can feel focused when life feels easy. Anyone can appear confident when emotions feel positive. But discipline reveals itself when discomfort arrives, when exhaustion appears, when stress increases, when nobody is watching. That is where identity is truly built. Most people underestimate how deeply excuses damage the mind psychologically. Every time you abandon your commitment because you do not feel like continuing, your brain records that behavior. Every time you choose comfort instead of responsibility, you reinforce weakness internally. Eventually, the mind stops trusting your own words because your actions repeatedly contradict your promises. This is why so many people secretly struggle with low self-esteem, not because they lack ability, but because they no longer trust themselves. They have spent years breaking promises to their own mind, years saying they would become disciplined later, years avoiding difficult action while convincing themselves change was still coming someday, but someday becomes dangerous when repeated long enough. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 5, Paragraph 5, that a person should stop arguing about what a good man should be and simply become one. That idea destroys modern excuse culture completely. Discipline is not built through endless thinking. It is built through action repeated consistently despite emotional resistance. And emotional resistance is where most people lose. The modern world encourages emotional dependence constantly. People are taught to prioritize feelings above duty, comfort above growth, and personal ease above personal responsibility. But feelings change constantly. A person who depends on motivation will eventually become inconsistent because emotions are unstable by nature. Disciplined individuals understand something most people never fully accept. Action must come first. Feelings follow later. This is why powerful people continue moving forward while others remain trapped in hesitation. They train themselves to operate beyond emotional fluctuation. They understand that the mind often resists the very things necessary for growth. They know the brain naturally seeks comfort, familiarity, and immediate relief. That is why discipline requires conscious resistance against impulsive behavior. Excuses also create a dangerous illusion of future change. People believe they will become disciplined later without realizing that identity is built through repeated action now. The person who avoids effort today is training themselves to avoid effort tomorrow as well. Habits compound silently. Weakness compounds silently too. Seneca warned in Letters from a Stoic, Letter 1, that while people waste time hesitating, life moves forward relentlessly. Every day spent waiting for perfect conditions becomes another day strengthening mediocrity. Time does not pause while people search for comfort. Life continues moving whether discipline exists or not, and eventually reality becomes unavoidable. One day, the consequences of excuses arrive all at once. Lost opportunities, broken confidence, regret, frustration, physical exhaustion, mental weakness. The painful realization that years disappeared while potential remained undeveloped. That realization destroys many people emotionally because deep inside they know they betrayed themselves repeatedly. But discipline changes everything the moment excuses lose authority. The moment a person stops asking whether they feel ready and starts acting anyway, identity begins transforming. The moment responsibility becomes stronger than emotion, self-respect returns. The moment discomfort stops controlling decisions, power begins growing internally. Most people spend years trying to change their circumstances before changing themselves. Disciplined people understand the opposite is true. Your life begins changing the moment your excuses stop controlling your behavior. And what most people still fail to understand is that the next obstacle standing in their way is even more dangerous than excuses themselves, because it disguises itself as inspiration while secretly keeping people weak, inconsistent, and emotionally dependent. The brutal truth about motivation: nobody accepts. Most people spend their lives waiting for a feeling that was never designed to carry them to greatness. They wait to feel inspired. They wait to feel emotionally ready. They wait for confidence, certainty, excitement, or the perfect moment to finally become disciplined. But the brutal truth is that motivation is one of the most unreliable forces a person can build a life around. Motivation feels powerful in the beginning because emotions create temporary intensity. A person watches something inspiring, feels energized for a few hours, makes promises to themselves, imagines a different future, and believes change has finally arrived. But then reality appears. Fatigue appears. Stress appears. Boredom appears. Emotional resistance appears. And suddenly the same person who felt unstoppable yesterday cannot even maintain basic consistency today. This is why so many people remain trapped in cycles of starting and stopping. They confuse emotional excitement with transformation. But transformation is not emotional. Transformation is behavioral. It is built through repeated action long after motivation disappears. The modern world has created an unhealthy obsession with motivation because motivation feels good emotionally. It creates temporary hope without demanding immediate discipline. People consume motivational content endlessly while avoiding the painful repetition required to truly change their lives. They become addicted to emotional stimulation instead of becoming committed to consistent execution. And that addiction quietly destroys progress. Seneca wrote in Letters from a Stoic, Letter 20, that the path to wisdom requires practice, not speeches. Those words expose one of the greatest problems of modern self-improvement culture. Many people love the feeling of inspiration more than the reality of discipline. They enjoy imagining success but resist the daily discomfort necessary to build it. Discipline begins exactly where motivation ends. That is the point most people never reach. anyone can act when emotions are strong. Anyone can feel focused temporarily, but disciplined individuals learn how to continue when excitement disappears completely. They understand that emotions are unstable, but principles must remain stable regardless of mood. This changes everything psychologically. A person dependent on motivation becomes emotionally fragile because their productivity rises and falls with feelings. Good mood, strong action. Bad mood, no action. Stressful day, discipline disappears. Lack of excitement, focus disappears. Their life becomes controlled by emotional weather instead of intentional behavior. But emotionally disciplined people operate differently. They stop treating emotions as commands. They understand feelings are temporary mental states, not instructions that must be obeyed. They act because the task matters, not because they feel inspired in the moment. Epictetus taught in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 1, Chapter 28, that people are disturbed not by events themselves, but by the opinions they form about those events. In the same way, many people are not defeated by difficulty itself. They are defeated by the emotional meaning they attach to discomfort. The moment effort feels unpleasant, they interpret that discomfort as a sign to stop. But disciplined minds interpret discomfort differently. They see resistance as proof that growth is happening. This is why powerful individuals often seem calm under pressure, while others become emotionally overwhelmed. They trained themselves to separate action from emotion. They no longer require excitement to perform responsibilities. They no longer negotiate with their minds every time effort becomes uncomfortable. Most people never realize how dangerous emotional dependence truly becomes. A person who only acts when motivated will always remain inconsistent, because emotions fluctuate constantly. Some days the mind feels confident, other days it feels weak. Some mornings, energy feels high. Other mornings, the brain resists everything. If discipline depends on emotional state, consistency becomes impossible. And consistency is what creates transformation, not intensity, not temporary inspiration, not emotional excitement. Consistency. That is why small repeated actions eventually overpower dramatic bursts of motivation. A disciplined person who moves forward every day, even imperfectly, will eventually surpass the person constantly waiting for emotional readiness before acting. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 6, Paragraph 12, that a person should do what nature demands without complaining if it is within their power. That mindset is almost completely absent in modern culture. Today, people are encouraged to prioritize emotional comfort above responsibility. But responsibility does not disappear simply because emotions feel difficult. Life continues moving regardless of how you feel. And the frightening truth is that many people waste years waiting for motivation to rescue them, while disciplined individuals quietly build stronger lives in silence. This is why motivation can become dangerous when misunderstood. It creates the illusion of progress without requiring deep commitment. It gives people emotional satisfaction before real work has even begun. And eventually, they become trapped consuming inspiration instead of developing execution. Execution is what changes identity. Execution is what builds self-respect. Execution is what creates confidence. Every time you continue despite resistance, your mind becomes stronger. Every time you act while emotions tell you not to, you weaken the control your impulses have over you. That is how mental toughness is built, not through perfect feelings, but through repeated action under imperfect emotional conditions. The strongest people in the world are not the most motivated people. They are the people who learned how to function without motivation entirely. And once a person reaches that level of control, something extraordinary begins happening internally. Discomfort stops feeling like an enemy. It starts becoming a weapon that builds psychological power most people will never understand. The psychological power of doing what you hate. Most people spend their lives trying to avoid discomfort. They organize their routines around convenience, pleasure, emotional safety, and temporary relief. The moment something feels difficult, exhausting, repetitive, or mentally uncomfortable, they immediately search for escape. But hidden inside the very things people avoid is one of the greatest sources of psychological power: a human being can develop the ability to do what you hate without losing control over yourself. This is where discipline separates itself from motivation completely. Motivation works only when emotions cooperate. Discipline works even when the mind resists every step forward. And the moment a person learns how to function under discomfort instead of escaping from it, their entire identity begins to change. Because discomfort reveals truth. It exposes weakness. It exposes emotional dependence. It exposes lack of self-control. Most people believe they are disciplined until life becomes difficult, until exhaustion appears, until pressure increases, until boredom stretches for weeks. That is when the real battle begins. Anyone can chase goals when excitement is high. Very few people continue when the process becomes repetitive, emotionally draining, lonely, and difficult. But that exact phase is where mental toughness is built. Musonius Rufus taught in Lectures of Musonius Rufus, Lecture 6, that hardship should not be feared because struggle strengthens both character and endurance. Ancient Stoic philosophy understood something modern society desperately tries to avoid. Human beings grow through resistance. Strength is developed under pressure, not comfort. A muscle becomes stronger through tension. The mind works the same way. Every time you voluntarily do something difficult, your tolerance for discomfort increases. Every time you continue despite resistance, your emotional control becomes stronger. Over time, the mind begins adapting to challenge instead of fearing it. This is why disciplined individuals often appear calmer under stress. They trained themselves to stop panicking when life becomes uncomfortable. Most people never develop this ability because they spend years conditioning themselves to escape discomfort immediately. If boredom appears, they grab their phones. If stress appears, they distract themselves. If effort feels exhausting, they quit temporarily and call it self-care. Slowly, their minds lose the ability to endure anything challenging without emotional collapse, and this weakness spreads into every area of life. A person who avoids difficult conversations loses authority. A person who avoids hard work loses opportunity. A person who avoids emotional discomfort loses resilience. Eventually, avoidance becomes identity. Seneca wrote in On Providence that difficulty tests the spirit in the same way fire tests gold. That is why suffering often reveals more about a person than success ever will. Under pressure, masks disappear. Excuses disappear. Reality becomes visible. And many people discover they are emotionally weaker than they imagined. But there is another side to this truth. Discomfort is not only exposing weakness, it is also creating strength at the exact same time. Every difficult task completed strengthens discipline. Every uncomfortable action builds internal authority. Every moment you resist emotional escape increases psychological endurance. That is why disciplined people slowly become harder to break mentally. Their minds adapt to pressure because they stop running from it constantly. This is one of the greatest advantages a human being can develop in modern society. Most people today have become emotionally fragile because their lives revolve around comfort. Small inconveniences create frustration. Minor criticism creates anxiety. Delayed gratification feels unbearable. As a result, many collapse emotionally under situations previous generations would have considered normal. And the terrifying part is that emotional weakness compounds silently. The more you avoid discomfort, the weaker your tolerance becomes. The weaker your tolerance becomes, the more life controls your emotions. Eventually, even small challenges begin feeling overwhelming because the mind was never trained to endure resistance consistently. Epictetus taught in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 1, Chapter 24, that difficulties show what men truly are. Pressure does not create character from nothing. It reveals the level of discipline already developed internally. That is why some people remain composed under chaos, while others lose emotional control immediately. The difference is training. Psychological strength is built long before difficult moments arrive. This is why disciplined individuals deliberately place themselves in uncomfortable situations voluntarily. They wake up early even when tired. They continue working when distracted. They train when emotionally resistant. They remain focused when others seek entertainment. Through repetition, the mind begins understanding something powerful. Discomfort is survivable, and once the brain realizes discomfort will not destroy you, fear loses control over your decisions. That is when confidence starts becoming real. Not fake confidence built through positive thinking, but deep internal confidence created through evidence. Evidence that you can continue despite difficulty. Evidence that emotions no longer dominate your actions completely. Evidence that discomfort no longer controls your behavior. Most people spend years searching for confidence externally without realizing confidence is built through self-respect. And self-respect grows every time you prove to yourself that your principles are stronger than your impulses. The strongest minds in history were not created through easy lives. They were forged through resistance, repetition, discipline, pressure, sacrifice, and emotional endurance. They learned how to remain stable while discomfort surrounded them. And once a person develops that ability, they begin understanding something the average mind never fully grasps. The things you hate doing often contain the exact transformation you have been searching for your entire life. The discipline of controlling your mind before your actions. Most people believe discipline begins with behavior. They focus on routines, schedules, habits, and external actions, while ignoring the deeper battle happening underneath all of it. But behavior is only the surface. Every action is born from thought first. Every decision is shaped internally before it appears externally. That is why true discipline begins long before the body moves. It begins inside the mind. A person who cannot control thoughts will eventually struggle to control actions, because the mind always influences behavior. If thoughts become chaotic, actions become inconsistent. If impulses dominate attention, discipline collapses. If emotions control perception, decisions become unstable. This is why so many people fail repeatedly even while trying to change externally. They attempt to force new behaviors while their internal world remains undisciplined. And eventually, the mind pulls them back toward familiar weakness. The human brain constantly generates impulses, distractions, fears, desires, excuses, emotional reactions, and internal resistance. Most people obey these mental signals automatically without questioning them. If the mind says rest, they stop. If the mind says procrastinate, they delay. If the mind says escape discomfort, they seek distraction immediately. Over time, this creates a dangerous pattern where the individual becomes psychologically controlled by temporary mental states. That is not discipline. That is dependency. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 5, paragraph 16, that the soul becomes stronger when it gains authority over itself instead of being dragged by impulse like a puppet. That image perfectly describes modern life. Many people are not directing their minds consciously anymore. Their attention is constantly being pulled by emotion, stimulation, fear, pleasure, and distraction. The mind becomes reactive instead of intentional, and reactive minds rarely build powerful lives. This is why controlling thought patterns becomes one of the most important forms of discipline a person can develop. Before actions change consistently, internal dialogue must change first. A disciplined individual learns how to observe thoughts without immediately obeying them. They understand that not every emotion deserves action. Not every craving deserves attention. Not every fear deserves belief. This creates psychological distance between impulse and behavior. And inside that distance, real power begins to grow. Most people never develop this awareness. Their minds operate automatically. Negative thoughts appear and instantly shape behavior. Anxiety appears and action stops. Doubt appears and discipline disappears. Emotional resistance appears and focus collapses, because they never learned how to separate themselves from the temporary states moving through their minds. Epictetus taught in Enchiridion of Epictetus, paragraph 20, that people are disturbed not by things themselves, but by the judgments they make about them. That lesson reveals something incredibly important about mental discipline. External circumstances do not automatically destroy focus. Internal interpretation does. Two people can face the same difficulty while responding completely differently psychologically. One becomes emotional, distracted, and overwhelmed. The other remains calm, focused, and controlled. The difference is not the obstacle itself. The difference is mental training. A disciplined mind does not eliminate negative thoughts completely. That is impossible. Instead, it learns how to prevent those thoughts from gaining authority over action. This is one of the greatest forms of emotional strength a person can develop in modern society. Because modern life constantly attacks mental focus. Every notification interrupts thought. Every distraction fragments attention. Every emotional trigger competes for control over the mind. Over time, people become mentally exhausted because their thoughts never slow down. Their attention becomes scattered across endless stimulation until deep focus feels almost impossible. And once focus disappears, discipline weakens quickly afterward. A distracted mind struggles to create consistency because attention keeps shifting toward immediate emotional stimulation. That is why many people feel busy all day while accomplishing very little. Their minds are constantly reacting instead of intentionally directing energy toward meaningful action. Disciplined individuals protect mental clarity aggressively because they understand attention is one of the most valuable forms of power in existence. Whatever controls your attention eventually influences your decisions, habits, emotions, and identity. Seneca warned in Letters from a Stoic, Letter 2, that the mind becomes scattered when it constantly moves from one thing to another without remaining grounded. That warning describes modern distraction perfectly. People consume endless information while developing very little depth internally. Their minds become overstimulated yet unfocused at the same time. And this constant mental fragmentation creates emotional instability. When the mind lacks control, impulsive behavior increases naturally. People become reactive, easily offended, easily distracted, easily manipulated. Their emotions rise and fall constantly depending on external circumstances because internal stability was never developed. But disciplined minds function differently. They learn how to pause before reacting. They learn how to remain calm under emotional pressure. They learn how to observe impulses without immediately obeying them. That pause changes everything. Because inside that pause exists the ability to choose principles instead of emotional reflexes. This is why mental discipline becomes the foundation of all external discipline. Before a person controls routines consistently, they must first learn how to control attention. Before they master actions, they must master thought patterns. Before they conquer the external world, they must first gain authority over the internal one. Most people attempt to change behavior while remaining mentally chaotic inside. That is why they repeatedly return to old habits. Because the mind always pulls behavior toward its dominant condition, and what makes this even more dangerous is that modern society benefits from people losing control over their own minds. Because weak minds are easier to influence, easier to distract, and easier to control without resistance. Why weak minds are easily controlled by society. The modern world does not need chains to control people anymore. It does not need physical force, prison walls, or visible oppression. Control has become psychological, invisible, silent, and most people willingly participate in it every single day without realizing how much of their thinking, attention, emotions, and behavior are being manipulated constantly. A weak mind is easy to control because it reacts emotionally instead of thinking independently. It follows trends instead of principles. It seeks validation instead of truth. It obeys impulses instead of discipline. And once a person loses authority over their own mind, society begins shaping their identity for them. That is why mental weakness has become so dangerous in modern life. People are constantly being told what to fear, what to desire, what to consume, what to believe, what to chase, and how to measure their worth. Every platform competes for attention. Every distraction pulls focus away from self-awareness. Every emotional trigger weakens independent thinking little by little. And most people never stop long enough to notice what is happening to them internally. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 8, paragraph 48, that the soul becomes colored by its thoughts. That truth becomes terrifying when a person realizes how much of modern thinking is being influenced externally. A distracted mind absorbs the emotions, fears, anger, comparison, and chaos surrounding it, until eventually, it no longer knows what thoughts are truly its own. This is why so many people feel mentally exhausted today. Their minds are overloaded with stimulation but starving for clarity. Weak minds become vulnerable because they constantly seek external comfort, approval from others, entertainment, emotional reassurance, constant stimulation. The more dependent a person becomes on external validation, the easier they become to manipulate emotionally. A person who cannot tolerate loneliness becomes controlled by acceptance. A person who cannot tolerate boredom becomes controlled by distraction. A person who cannot tolerate discomfort becomes controlled by pleasure. This is exactly why modern society rewards emotional dependency so aggressively. Independent minds are difficult to manipulate. Disciplined minds are difficult to distract. People who control themselves become dangerous to systems designed to profit from weakness and impulsiveness. Epictetus taught in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 4, Chapter 4, that no person can truly be free if they are controlled by external things. Most people misunderstand freedom completely. They think freedom means unlimited comfort and endless choices. But Stoic philosophy understood that freedom begins internally. A person controlled by fear, pleasure, distraction, comparison, or public opinion is never truly free. And public opinion controls more people than they realize. Many spend their entire lives shaping their identity around the expectations of others. They fear judgment more than regret. They suppress their true ambitions to avoid criticism. They remain average because standing out feels emotionally dangerous. Over time, they become disconnected from themselves completely because their actions are no longer guided by purpose, but by social approval. This creates a silent psychological prison. People begin performing versions of themselves instead of becoming authentic versions of themselves. And social media has amplified this weakness to an extreme level. Comparison has become constant. Validation has become addictive. Attention has become currency. People now measure self-worth through reactions, views, opinions, and external recognition while slowly losing internal stability. The result is emotional dependence on the approval of strangers. That dependence destroys discipline because disciplined people must eventually become comfortable walking alone. They must learn how to act according to principles even when others disagree, criticize, misunderstand, or reject them. Weak minds struggle with this deeply. They need constant reassurance before taking action. They need emotional support before remaining consistent. They need approval before believing in themselves. And because of that dependence, they become easy to influence. Seneca warned in Letters from a Stoic, Letter 7, that crowds often strengthen destructive behavior instead of wisdom. Most people assume society naturally guides individuals toward growth, but history repeatedly proves the opposite. Crowds are emotional. Crowds seek comfort. Crowds avoid responsibility. Crowds often punish discipline because discipline exposes weakness in others. This is why mentally strong individuals frequently feel different from the people around them. Their priorities change. Their habits change. Their standards change. They stop chasing temporary validation and begin pursuing internal mastery instead. That shift changes everything. Because once a person gains control over attention, emotions, and impulses, manipulation becomes far less effective. Fear loses power. Social pressure weakens. Distraction loses control. The person begins thinking independently instead of emotionally reacting to every external influence surrounding them. Most people never reach this level because society trains them to remain reactive. Constant noise keeps them distracted. Constant stimulation keeps them impulsive. Constant comparison keeps them insecure. And insecurity creates emotional vulnerability. The frightening truth is that weak minds rarely realize they are being controlled because manipulation feels normal when everyone around them behaves the same way. But disciplined individuals eventually notice the pattern. They notice how distraction weakens focus. They notice how overstimulation destroys clarity. They notice how emotional dependency destroys freedom. And once they see it clearly, they begin separating themselves from the behaviors keeping everyone else mentally trapped. Because powerful minds understand something society hopes most people never fully realize. The person who controls their own mind becomes nearly impossible to control from the outside, and that level of independence comes with a price most people are too afraid to pay. The price of loneliness. The loneliness required to build an extraordinary life. One of the hardest truths about discipline is that growth often separates you from people who were once comfortable keeping you average. The moment you begin changing seriously, something shifts in your relationships, your environment, and even the way others respond to your presence. Not because you became arrogant, but because discipline forces a person to move differently, to think differently, to tolerate things emotionally that most people spend their lives avoiding. And that path becomes lonely long before it becomes rewarding. Most people want success publicly, but very few are willing to endure the isolation required to build it privately. They want confidence without solitude, strength without sacrifice, mastery without emotional discomfort. But extraordinary lives are not built in constant comfort and social approval. They are built in silence, repetition, discipline, and long periods where nobody notices the work being done. This is the stage where many people give up. Not because the goal became impossible, but because loneliness exposed how emotionally dependent they truly were. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 4, Paragraph 3, that people should retreat into themselves because nowhere can a person find more peace than within their own mind. That idea feels almost impossible for modern society to understand. Most people fear being alone because silence forces confrontation with the self. Without distraction, unresolved thoughts become louder. Without constant stimulation, emotional emptiness becomes visible. Without validation, insecurity reveals itself. That is why many people remain surrounded by noise constantly. Music, notifications, conversations, entertainment, endless distraction. Not because silence is unbearable by nature, but because silence removes escape routes. And disciplined individuals eventually learn how to sit inside that silence without collapsing emotionally. This creates enormous psychological strength. A person who becomes comfortable alone gains freedom most people never experience. They stop needing constant approval. They stop depending on external attention to feel valuable. They stop shaping their identity around acceptance. Their confidence becomes internal instead of social. That level of independence changes the way a person moves through life completely. But reaching that point requires painful separation from old patterns, old habits, and sometimes even old relationships. Because not everyone will understand your transformation. Some people become uncomfortable when you become disciplined because your discipline exposes their excuses. Your focus reminds them of their distractions. Your consistency confronts their inconsistency. And instead of becoming inspired, many react defensively because your growth silently forces them to confront the areas where they abandon their own potential. Seneca warned in Letters from a Stoic, Letter 25, that a person becomes like the company they keep. That truth becomes dangerous when surrounded by people addicted to comfort, distraction, emotional weakness, and mediocrity. Energy spreads psychologically. Habits spread psychologically. Standards spread psychologically. If everyone around you avoids discipline, eventually remaining focused becomes much harder. This is why extraordinary individuals often spend long periods alone during their transformation. Not because they hate people, but because growth requires protection. Protection of focus, protection of energy, protection of identity. Most people underestimate how difficult it is to build a disciplined mind while constantly surrounded by environments rewarding impulsiveness and distraction. Eventually, difficult decisions must be made. Certain habits must disappear. Certain environments must be abandoned. Certain conversations lose meaning completely. And that transition feels painful emotionally, because humans naturally fear separation. The brain seeks belonging for survival. That is why many people remain trapped in destructive cycles simply because changing would make them feel isolated temporarily. They choose familiar weakness over unfamiliar growth because loneliness feels emotionally threatening. But loneliness and solitude are not the same thing. Loneliness comes from disconnection with purpose. Solitude comes from alignment with purpose. Disciplined individuals eventually learn how to transform solitude into strength. Instead of fearing silence, they begin using it for reflection, focus, recovery, and mental clarity. They stop seeing isolation as punishment and begin recognizing it as necessary space for internal development. Epictetus taught in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 3, Chapter 22, that people should first decide who they wish to become and then consistently do what is necessary to become that person. That sounds simple until the process demands emotional sacrifice. Because becoming someone extraordinary often requires temporary separation from people, habits, environments, and behaviors that no longer align with the future you are trying to build. And most people fear that separation more than they fear wasting their potential. This is why so few individuals fully transform themselves. The process feels emotionally uncomfortable before it feels empowering. During the early stages of discipline, results are invisible. Validation disappears. Doubt increases. The mind questions whether the sacrifice is worth it. That is the moment where emotional endurance becomes essential. Because powerful lives are not built through constant applause. They are built through private consistency repeated for long periods without recognition. And eventually something remarkable begins happening internally. The person who once feared being alone begins valuing solitude deeply. The noise that once felt necessary becomes exhausting. Distraction loses appeal. Validation loses importance. Focus becomes addictive. Purpose becomes clearer. The individual begins realizing that isolation was never the punishment. The real punishment was remaining surrounded by distractions that were quietly destroying their future. And once a person reaches that level of internal clarity, something even more powerful begins to develop naturally. A form of self-respect so deep that it changes the way they speak, think, move, and live every single day. The daily habits that build unshakable self-respect. Most people think self-respect is something you feel, something connected to confidence, personality, or the way others treat you. But true self-respect is not emotional. It is behavioral. It is built slowly through the relationship you develop with your own actions every single day. Your mind is always watching you. It notices when you break promises to yourself. It notices when you quit the moment things become difficult. It notices when you choose comfort over growth again and again. And over time, those repeated actions create either trust or disappointment within yourself. That is why many people secretly struggle with confidence, even when they appear successful externally. Deep inside, they know how often they abandoned their own standards. They know how many times they betrayed their own discipline for temporary comfort. And the mind never completely forgets those moments. Self-respect is built when your actions begin matching your words consistently. When you say you will wake up early and you actually do it. When you say you will stay focused and you resist distraction. When you say you will continue despite difficulty and you follow through even when emotions resist. These moments seem small externally, but psychologically they are transforming identity. Because every disciplined action sends a message to the mind. I can trust myself. And once that trust begins growing internally, confidence changes completely. It no longer depends on external validation, compliments, attention, or approval. It becomes grounded in evidence. Evidence created through daily behavior repeated consistently over time. Epictetus taught in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 1, Chapter 4, that no great thing is suddenly created, just as a grape or a fig requires time to ripen fully. The same principle applies to character. Strong identity is not built through dramatic moments. It is built through small disciplined actions repeated long enough that they become part of who you are. Most people underestimate the psychological power of consistency because modern culture glorifies intensity instead of repetition. People become excited by dramatic transformation stories but ignore the invisible habits responsible for creating them. Yet almost every extraordinary life was built through ordinary actions performed with extraordinary consistency. This is where discipline becomes deeply spiritual in a psychological sense. Because repeated disciplined behavior reshapes the way you see yourself. A person who consistently keeps promises to themselves begins walking differently, speaking differently, thinking differently. Their energy changes because internal trust changes. And internal trust creates stability. That stability becomes powerful under pressure. When difficult moments arrive, disciplined individuals do not collapse emotionally as easily because they already possess evidence of their own resilience. They have repeatedly proven to themselves that they can endure discomfort, maintain focus, and continue moving forward despite resistance. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 7, paragraph 67, that a person's worth is measured by the worth of the things they devote themselves to consistently. Most people devote themselves to distraction without realizing it. Endless scrolling, endless entertainment, endless emotional escape. And eventually those behaviors shape identity silently. But disciplined individuals devote themselves differently. They devote themselves to growth, to control, to purpose, to mastery. And because of that, their minds gradually become stronger, while others remain trapped in cycles of emotional inconsistency. The daily habits creating self-respect are often simple, but simplicity does not mean easy. Waking up when you said you would, finishing work without emotional excuses, training your body even when motivation disappears, remaining focused while surrounded by distraction, controlling emotional reactions instead of impulsively expressing everything you feel. These actions appear ordinary externally, but internally, they are creating psychological authority. That authority becomes one of the most powerful forces a human being can develop, because it eliminates internal doubt gradually. A disciplined person stops questioning whether they are capable because their behavior already provides the answer repeatedly. This is why disciplined people often appear calmer and more grounded than others. Their confidence is not dependent on emotional highs. It comes from accumulated evidence built through action. They know they can rely on themselves because they have spent years proving it. Most people crave confidence while avoiding the behaviors required to build it. They want self-respect without sacrifice. They want certainty without discipline. They want power without repetition. But the mind does not respond to wishes. It responds to patterns. Whatever patterns you repeat eventually become identity. Seneca warned in Letters from a Stoic, letter 52, that a person must choose carefully what habits they allow into their life, because habits quickly become chains. This is why small behaviors matter far more than most people realize. Repeated distractions become weakness. Repeated excuses become identity. Repeated avoidance becomes character. But the opposite is also true. Repeated discipline becomes strength. Repeated consistency becomes confidence. Repeated self-control becomes freedom. And eventually something extraordinary begins happening psychologically. The person who once struggled to control themselves starts developing internal stability so strong that external chaos loses power over them. Because real self-respect changes more than emotions. It changes standards. A disciplined person eventually stops tolerating behaviors, environments, and patterns that weaken the mind. Their identity evolves. Their priorities evolve. Their relationships with comfort and distraction evolve completely. And once self-respect becomes deeply rooted internally, something else naturally begins growing alongside it. Influence. Because the world responds differently to people who have clearly mastered themselves. Why discipline creates wealth, power, and influence. Most people look at wealthy, powerful, and highly influential individuals and assume they possess something rare that ordinary people do not. Superior intelligence, natural talent, perfect opportunities, extraordinary luck. But what many fail to see is that behind nearly every form of lasting success exists one invisible force holding everything together. Discipline, not temporary motivation, not emotional excitement, not talent alone. Discipline. Because discipline creates consistency, and consistency creates advantage over time. This is the part most people underestimate. Success is rarely built through one dramatic moment. It is built through repeated behavior sustained for years while others become distracted, emotional, inconsistent, or comfortable. Wealth compounds through discipline. Influence compounds through discipline. Skill compounds through discipline. Mental strength compounds through discipline. And while most people search for shortcuts, disciplined individuals quietly build lives that become impossible to ignore. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 10, paragraph 16, that a person's life becomes what their thoughts and actions repeatedly shape it into. This is why disciplined individuals often appear unstoppable after enough time passes. Their habits are aligned with long-term outcomes instead of temporary emotions. Most people make decisions emotionally. Disciplined people make decisions strategically. That difference changes everything financially, mentally, physically, and socially. A person controlled by impulse struggles to build wealth because impulsiveness destroys consistency. They chase temporary pleasure instead of long-term value. They seek comfort instead of mastery. They abandon difficult processes too early because immediate emotional relief feels more attractive than delayed success. But disciplined individuals understand delayed gratification deeply. They are willing to sacrifice short-term comfort for long-term freedom. That mindset creates enormous advantage in a world addicted to instant pleasure. Most people want results immediately, money immediately, recognition immediately, success immediately. But meaningful achievement often requires long periods where results are invisible. This is why so many quit early. Their emotions cannot tolerate delayed reward. Epictetus taught in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 1, Chapter 15, that people must first decide the type of person they wish to become, and then consistently act according to that identity. Wealthy and powerful individuals understand this instinctively. Their success is not random behavior. It is structured behavior repeated intentionally for years. They develop routines while others develop excuses. They build focus while others consume distraction. They create skills while others seek entertainment. And over time, the gap becomes enormous. This is why discipline creates power beyond money itself. A disciplined person develops internal authority. They become emotionally stable under pressure. They become reliable, focused, calm, strategic. Their decisions improve because emotions stop dominating every action they take. That level of control naturally creates influence. People trust disciplined individuals more because discipline signals competence. A person who controls themselves appears stronger psychologically than someone controlled by moods, impulses, and emotional inconsistency. Even without speaking, disciplined people communicate stability through behavior alone. And stability is rare in modern society. Most people today are emotionally reactive, easily distracted, easily manipulated, easily overwhelmed. Their focus shifts constantly because their minds lack structure internally. But disciplined individuals create structure where chaos exists. That ability becomes extremely valuable in business, leadership, relationships, and life itself. Seneca warned in Letters from a Stoic, Letter 27, that people should govern themselves before attempting to govern anything else. That principle explains why so many individuals fail when given power or opportunity. External success amplifies internal weakness. If discipline does not exist internally first, eventually emotions sabotage everything externally. This is why self-mastery always comes before lasting success. Without discipline, money disappears. Without discipline, influence becomes unstable. Without discipline, talent becomes wasted potential. The strongest people in history understood that controlling the self was the foundation of controlling circumstances. They mastered attention, time, emotion, focus, action, while others wasted years reacting impulsively to every distraction surrounding them. And modern society makes this separation even more extreme. Because today, discipline has become rare. The average person struggles to focus for even a few minutes without checking notifications. The average person struggles to remain consistent without emotional motivation. The average person struggles to delay gratification long enough to create meaningful progress. That means disciplined individuals automatically gain advantage simply because they can do what most people refuse to sustain consistently. Imagine the psychological power of becoming someone who follows through regardless of mood. Someone who remains focused while others become distracted. Someone who keeps building while others keep complaining. That level of discipline eventually becomes intimidating because consistency creates momentum, and momentum creates opportunities. Wealthy individuals often appear lucky from the outside because people only notice results after years of invisible discipline already shaped them. Nobody sees the lonely mornings, the sacrifices, the repetitive work, the emotional control, the years spent developing skills while others searched for comfort. But disciplined people understand something average minds rarely accept. Success is often boring before it becomes extraordinary. Repetition creates mastery. Consistency creates freedom. Focus creates opportunity. And over time, disciplined individuals begin separating themselves from average behavior completely. Their standards rise, their thinking sharpens, their emotional stability strengthens. Eventually, they stop chasing external approval because their lives are now being driven by internal purpose instead. That is when influence becomes natural, not forced, not performed, natural. Because people are drawn toward individuals who clearly possess control over themselves. And yet, even after reaching success, there is still one final difference separating ordinary achievers from the rare individuals history never forgets. An obsession so powerful that it transforms discipline into identity itself. The obsession that separates legends from ordinary people. There is a level beyond discipline that most people never reach. A level where consistency stops feeling forced. A level where purpose becomes stronger than emotion, stronger than comfort, stronger than fear. It is the point where discipline transforms into obsession. Not unhealthy obsession driven by ego or desperation. A controlled obsession. An internal fire that refuses to allow mediocrity to survive inside the mind any longer. This is the difference between people who improve temporarily and people who completely transform their lives. Ordinary individuals rely on motivation when it feels convenient. Extraordinary individuals become consumed by the process itself. Their standards become non-negotiable. Their focus becomes relentless. Their commitment survives even when emotions collapse. That level of intensity changes a person psychologically. Because obsession creates identity. The average mind wakes up asking how it feels today. Obsessed minds wake up asking what must be done regardless of how they feel. That single difference separates dreamers from builders. Most people underestimate how powerful obsession becomes when directed correctly. History's most influential individuals were rarely balanced in the way modern society encourages. They were deeply committed, focused beyond distraction, consumed by purpose. They repeated difficult actions so consistently that discipline stopped feeling like effort and started becoming instinct. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 2, Paragraph 5, that people should concentrate every minute like a Roman and like a man on doing what is in front of them, with precise seriousness and genuine focus. That mentality creates extraordinary individuals because attention becomes unified instead of scattered. And scattered minds rarely create extraordinary lives. The modern world constantly trains people to divide attention. Endless scrolling, endless stimulation, endless emotional noise. People consume everything while mastering nothing. They begin tasks without finishing them. They chase goals without fully committing to them. Their energy becomes fragmented across distraction, comparison, entertainment, and emotional inconsistency. But obsessed individuals move differently. They simplify. They eliminate distractions aggressively. They protect focus with intensity. And because of that, their progress compounds faster than most people can understand. Obsession also changes the way pain is interpreted psychologically. Average minds view discomfort as evidence something is wrong. Obsessed minds begin viewing discomfort as proof they are moving forward. Sacrifice becomes meaningful because purpose gives suffering direction. That changes emotional endurance completely. A person without purpose becomes overwhelmed by pressure quickly because pain feels pointless. But when someone becomes deeply connected to a mission, discomfort loses much of its emotional power. Fatigue becomes tolerable. Repetition becomes tolerable. Isolation becomes tolerable. The individual begins understanding that temporary suffering is the price of becoming someone extraordinary. Epictetus taught in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 2, Chapter 18, that no great thing is created suddenly, and that a person must be willing to endure difficulty if they truly desire greatness. Obsession creates the endurance necessary for that process because it keeps the mind locked onto long-term vision, even when short-term emotions fluctuate. This is why extraordinary people often appear misunderstood during their transformation. Average individuals cannot fully understand the mindset of someone willing to sacrifice comfort for years in pursuit of mastery. To distracted minds, obsession appears extreme. To disciplined minds, it appears necessary, and the truth is uncomfortable. Without intensity, most people eventually surrender to comfort. That is why ordinary ambition often fails. The desire is weak. The commitment is conditional. The standards disappear the moment life becomes difficult. But obsessed individuals continue because purpose has become stronger than emotional resistance. Their habits become automatic. Their focus becomes addictive. Their discipline becomes identity. Seneca warned on the tranquility of mind that people suffer greatly when their minds lack clear direction. That is exactly what happens to average individuals drifting through life without deep commitment. Their attention moves constantly because nothing internally anchors them with enough intensity to resist distraction. Obsessed individuals are anchored differently. Their purpose organizes behavior. Their standards organize decisions. Their mission organizes attention. And because of that, their lives gain momentum while others remain trapped in emotional inconsistency. Most people fear obsession because they associate it with imbalance. But the real danger is often the opposite. A life with no deep commitment slowly becomes empty. The mind begins searching for stimulation everywhere because nothing meaningful commands enough focus internally. That emptiness creates distraction addiction. But purposeful obsession eliminates much of that internal chaos because energy finally becomes concentrated instead of scattered. And concentrated energy becomes powerful. The strongest individuals in history were rarely casual about their growth. They trained relentlessly, focused relentlessly, improved relentlessly. While others negotiated with excuses, they continued building silently. That is why discipline alone is not always enough. At some point, a person must become emotionally committed to transformation itself, committed enough to continue while nobody applauds, committed enough to sacrifice temporary pleasure, committed enough to endure loneliness, repetition, and discomfort for years if necessary. Because extraordinary lives are not created through occasional effort. They are created through sustained obsession directed toward meaningful purpose. And eventually, after enough years pass, something haunting begins happening internally. The person starts realizing they are slowly becoming someone completely different from who they used to be. Stronger, calmer, more focused, more dangerous to weakness. And yet there is one final realization waiting at the end of this entire journey. A realization so powerful that it forces every person to confront the most painful question of all. Who would you have become if you had truly mastered yourself sooner? One day you will meet the person you could have become. One day, whether you are ready for it or not, life will force you to confront a painful question. Not how much money you made, not how many people admired you, not how comfortable your life became. The real question will be much deeper than that. Who could you have become if you had stopped betraying yourself? That question haunts more people than failure ever does, because deep inside most individuals already know the truth. They know there was more potential inside them, more discipline, more courage, more focus, more strength, more life waiting to be lived. But somewhere along the way, comfort became stronger than purpose. Distraction became stronger than clarity. Emotional weakness became stronger than responsibility. And little by little, they drifted away from the person they once imagined becoming. This is the tragedy of wasted potential. Not that a person fails occasionally, but that they slowly stop trying seriously at all. They settle into routines that weaken them. They normalize procrastination. They normalize emotional dependency. They normalize distraction. And because this decline happens gradually, many never realize how far they have drifted until years are already gone. Seneca wrote in On the Shortness of Life that life is long enough if it is used properly, but most people waste enormous portions of it without understanding what they are losing. Time is not only being spent, identity is being shaped. Every repeated action either builds the person you are capable of becoming or slowly destroys that possibility. That is why discipline matters so deeply. Discipline is not about waking up early for no reason. It is not about suffering unnecessarily. It is about refusing to waste your own existence, because every day you delay growth, another version of yourself remains trapped behind fear, comfort, distraction, and excuses. Most people never meet that version, not because it never existed, but because they abandoned the process required to become it. The frightening truth is that life moves forward whether discipline exists or not. Time does not pause while you procrastinate. Opportunity does not wait while you negotiate with your emotions. Years disappear silently while people convince themselves they will eventually become serious later. Later becomes dangerous when repeated long enough. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 2, Paragraph 4, that a person should live each day as if it were their last, without distraction, without emotional chaos, and without pretending they have unlimited time. That mindset changes everything because it forces brutal honesty. How much of your life have you already sacrificed to comfort? How many opportunities disappeared because fear controlled your decisions? How many times did you promise yourself change while continuing the same destructive habits afterward? Most people spend years waiting for external circumstances to improve before changing internally. But the people who truly transform understand something powerful. Your life changes the moment you stop waiting to feel ready. The moment discipline becomes stronger than excuses. The moment purpose becomes stronger than temporary emotion. The moment you decide your future matters more than your comfort. That is where transformation begins. Not dramatically, quietly. In ordinary moments nobody else sees. The moment you continue despite resistance. The moment you stay focused while your mind begs for distraction. The moment you choose long-term growth over short-term pleasure. Those moments appear insignificant at first, but repeated over time, they create entirely different human beings. Epictetus taught in Enchiridion of Epictetus, paragraph 14, that if a person wishes to improve, they must become willing to appear foolish and uncomfortable in the eyes of others during the process of growth. That lesson explains why so few people fully transform themselves. Real discipline requires sacrifice. Real growth requires discomfort. Real mastery requires confronting parts of yourself most people spend their lives trying to escape. But there is freedom hidden inside that confrontation, because the moment you stop running from discomfort, fear loses power. The moment you stop obeying impulses, self-respect grows. The moment you stop negotiating with weakness, identity changes. And eventually, the disciplined version of yourself that once felt distant begins becoming real. Not perfect, not fearless, but stronger, calmer, more focused, more capable of enduring life without collapsing emotionally. That transformation changes more than external success. It changes the way you experience existence itself. You begin walking differently because your mind becomes stable. You begin thinking differently because distractions lose control over you. You begin speaking differently because internal confidence replaces emotional insecurity. And slowly, almost invisibly, you become someone your past self would barely recognize. This is why discipline is one of the greatest forms of self-respect a human being can develop. Because disciplined people do not destroy their future for temporary comfort. They protect it. They build it, they fight for it daily, even when nobody is watching. Most people will never understand how much power exists inside consistent self-control, because most people never sustain it long enough to experience what it truly does to the mind. But those who do discover something extraordinary, peace. Not the fragile peace created by comfort and avoidance. Real peace. The kind that appears when a person finally gains authority over themselves. And one day, years from now, you will meet the person your habits created. The question is whether that person will be someone you are proud to become, or someone you could have become if you had chosen discipline before time ran out.